So Nadine, let me start off with how meta this is. To give context, the year is 2013. The Wolf of Wall Street comes out. I was 15 at the time, and I'm absolutely astonished that it's a real story. I'm a bit perplexed by it, shocked by it, like many people.
Yes, yes, yes.
And then everyone loves it. Teenage boys start their infatuation with Margot Robbie, which is based off your character. You're called Naomi in the film, and then you're obviously Nadine, Dr. Nay. Um, but I remember Googling you after, and naturally, I wanted to find out who is this firecracker woman, where did she come from? But there's not much about you. And I always remember thinking that it's a one side portrayal, and I wonder how symmetrical the accounts are of this woman versus this man. But many years later, I read your book, I read your ex-husband's book, and I realized that you've gone on to do a PhD and now you work as a therapist, which is remarkable. If we dial it back to that point, to kind of be a little bit more away from things and not involved in the release and everything, was that a conscious decision?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. And so my ex, Jordan Belfort, he wrote a book, The Wolf of Wall Street. So that must have been, God, now the movie came out in 2013. The book must have been out around 2007, right? So I had time to acclimate myself first through that being a book, The Wolf of Wall Street. And then when he told me he was going to do a movie, I had so many emotions. I was first, and even when I read the book, I thought to myself, well, you know, thank I was so happy that I had moved away from him, that had started my life in California. I was like, okay, that's done, that's behind me. But then the book and the movie come haunting me, right? Because it was such a Greek tragedy to live through, and it was so traumatic to live through. So again, I had so many feelings around it. But luckily, I was in therapy at the time, so I got to process a lot of that. And then at one point, I just said, you know what, Nay, because I call myself Nay, you have to just surrender. Like, this is bigger than you. And that's what I did. I just said, okay, I'm going to surrender and see what emerges.
Well, not only are you coping with this really tumultuous, abusive at times marriage, and then it being set in stone, immortalized into a book, then
Right.
into a film, and then it's now into like a personal brand of his. You know, I think your circumstances are so unique, but it makes you so good at what you speak about, right?
Yeah, I wish I could say I had some great big plan and scheme, that, okay, when the movie comes out, I'm going to use it. I never had that thought. When the movie came out, I was finishing my doctorate, as you mentioned, and I had a private practice in Los Angeles, California. And what was happening was that all these smart, bright, beautiful women were coming into my practice being betrayed, being coercively controlled, being abused. And I thought, God, we still are in this? Like, is this the 1950s? So I went back to the research to write my book, Run Like Hell. And then as I was doing that, I played around with The Wolf of Wall Street on TikTok. And it just went viral. So then all of the pieces just started to fall together.
Yeah, and I think it does come from that want and desire to know your side as well, because like myself, even though I was a lot younger, I'm not married at that age.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
I knew as a woman, there's always another side to the story. Often people say there's two sides and then there's the truth. Now that you are kind of using the wolf machine and, you've done really well on social media and you've got your private practice, what was Jordan's reaction to you almost having that time to have your story, your say? Was he as kind as you? Was he angry?
Well, he was, let's put it this way, he was not thrilled, right? But I said to him, you wrote a book, you made a movie, I get to make a 3-minute fucking TikTok. I hope it's okay if I curse.
No, 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 it's fine on her. Don't worry.
I'm from Brooklyn, so I can't help it. So he did, but I was like, double standards are abusive. There can't be double standards. And, I'm not doing anything to bash Jordan. I mean, he's the father of my children, so why would I do that? But I'm just telling my narrative and my experience. And I think I have every right to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like everything. Sometimes there's an adjustment and you have to kind
Right.
of realize you're not happy with it. And then you, like you said, you just kind of surrendered to it and said, you know what, this is just not going to be my narrative anymore. It's not going to be my thing. When the film was being made, and obviously we're starting from kind of here and then we're going to get onto your
Yeah.
private practice and your work. When you found out that Margot Robbie was going to portray you, were you involved in the story? Were you allowed to monetize from it? Did they ask for your name, or what was the kind of conversation around using your name and likeness, your life, your story in something that was so big? Because for anyone who doesn't know, the film made over $500 million dollars.
Right. Yeah. So I don't make any money from the movie, and that's why I told them they can't use my name. It's not my narrative. I don't have any creative input. Yeah, and so I think they were worried I was going to sue them, and I said, I'm really not. You don't have to worry about that. I really just am concerned about my children. How they're going to, because they were around your age when the movie came out. My daughter was a little older, but they handled it just fine. And you have to remember, right back then, Margot Robbie, nobody even knew her. So she was this little 22-year-old girl that I got to meet because they wanted to get my accent.
Okay.
And she was adorable. She was the same age I was when I met my ex, and yeah, it was great.
Well, how did you initially cope with it just being blown into the full size picture? Because the book is one thing, but then the film is like times 10, isn't it? So what was your
Yeah.
initial vroom?
Yeah, luckily I've been in therapy my whole life, hence why I became a therapist, because I know that therapy works. So I got to go every single week, process my feelings around it. I did actually some dream therapy around it. And also, I had my own life, right? I had just finished my master's, I had my private practice, I was getting my doctorate. So I was very wrapped up in my own things that I was doing, and I know my own truth. So I didn't feel threatened by anything that he was, and I also kind of knew a little bit what the movie was going to portray because of the book. I mean, I didn't know what license Martin Scorsese would take with it, but in the end, I was fine with it because I was like, okay, I just look like a young girl who fell in love, who loved her kids, and was trying to follow this crazy guy around, which is kind of the truth.
I always felt like it was probably more condensed on your part, naturally because
Yeah.
it's his story.
It's his story, yes. Yeah, and the only thing, there was some differences, right? So I never threw water in his face, even though I probably should have. I never told him I was going to take his kids from him. There's that whole scene at the end where, she says, I'm going to take your kids, and that's why he gets violent. Like, that's not how that happened. I wasn't the yeller in the relationship. And he would yell a lot because I would confront him about his drug addiction. So we actually never fought about a woman ever, but we fought about his drug addiction. So, and that, he just chose to portray it in a different way, and that's okay. That's the way he wanted to portray it. But that really, our issues in our relationship were always about the drugs.
Did you know about the infidelity when it was
No,
happening, or did you have a distance of it? Or
I didn't really know. And honestly, I wasn't even focused on it because we were very much in love. We were always together. And if anything, he was the jealous one. And I was, of course, doing nothing. But now we know about narcissism that whatever they accuse you of is actually an accusation on their part, it's a projection. So I had no idea when he would get mad at me about like thinking I was having sex with the golf pro. I was like, are you crazy? I just got married. I'm 23 years old. So, yeah, it's just interesting how the man, he needed to see it or portray it.
I think an intersection that I clicked with your work was that you do now through, your therapy is this idea of when you're in love with an addict or, you're in love with someone who just can't quit something and how painful it is. Because on one hand, when you're a young girl, you don't know better than to not fall in love with potential. We've all done it, right? We've gone, oh, he's got so much potential and if he just sorts this one thing out, then it's going to be better. B, we don't know any better. And C, you're almost coping with the loss of what that person could have been, watching them demise through their addiction. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the principles you focus on your work with combating people who are going through, since it's such a popular thing?
Yeah, I think what happens is that we've been fed this myth of romantic love, that this charming, handsome prince is going to come and sweep us off our feet and save us. And like I say, ain't no prince coming. It's our job to save ourselves. And I think that when this person, I call them a pathological lover, presents to us, they present their best selves or their false best selves because they're really a con artist. And so we really don't know if somebody's not presenting their authentic self to you and you don't know it, it's really not your fault. But I call the two masks Romeo and Dirty John. So you fall in love with Romeo, but then the mask falls and then Dirty John emerges. And by the time Dirty John emerges, you're already in love. So I really teach women how to look for the red flags of, the love bombing. Is somebody monopolizing all your time and telling you that you're their soulmate after 2 dates, right? Do you notice that their words don't match actions? Do you notice that if you try to set a boundary with them, they go crazy? So on my website, I have something called a pathological lover checklist. And so if you're dating and you're wondering if somebody's like that, go take the checklist, go take it and see what this person, because love makes us blind.
What makes us an easy target for a pathological lover?
Somebody who's very trusting. Like, first of all, I was very naive. I was 22, 23 when I met my ex. And I am a super trusting person because you can trust me. I'm very straightforward. I'm altruistic. I'm very loyal. I love people, hence why I'm a therapist. I love relationships and love, hence why I'm a therapist. So, if you're a very trusting, naive person, you can get conned. I say anybody and everybody can get conned by a con artist.
I think you've mentioned before, there's a point of agreeableness versus non-agreeableness. Yes. I know myself, I'm not very agreeable. Like, I think I've always known it. But agreeable people have a bit of a harder time of people taking advantage of qualities that are really good in them, but exploiting them.
Yeah, they get weaponized. So, right, there's a test called the Big Five personality, and it measures, if you use the word ocean, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So the research shows, Sandra Brown research, she wrote a great book called Women Who Love Psychopath. That's where I first read this. Women who score very high in conscientiousness and agreeableness are perfect targets, and I score high in both.
If we dial it back to kind of before you meet a PL, girlhood, childhood, growing up, watching these fairy tales, do you think it's ultimately okay to have, our daughters, the girls in our society, watching these fairy tales?
I think that culture plays a huge, huge part in it, because we're very affected by images, especially our right brain, the emotional part of our brain. And I think we do have to be mindful of the stories that we introduce to young people, not just young women, but young people in general, about love, because slowly but surely those movies are conditioning us and indoctrinating us to see a certain way of loving. In fact, over the weekend, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Working Girl. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's from 1989. So I watched it this weekend through my 57-year-old lens, but when it came out, I guess it was right before I met Jordan, 21, 22. And I could just see how this movie, such as Liz, Pretty Woman, Wall Street, all the movies of that time were setting me up to believe that this powerful, wealthy man is just going to come and sweep me off my feet. Right? So it's not just Disney. Then there was all those movies from the 80s and 90s that did that as well.
I mean, it's so common, Snow White, I think, was my favorite as a child. And yes, the prince and her have a kiss at the end. She is asleep, which is a bit worrying about it. But then they walk off into the sunset. What happens after? No one speaks about what happens after you're rescued and lifted from your life. And another thing is, why do we have to be lifted from our life? Why do we have to see men as a means to an ends of survival? Why aren't we just seeing them merely as an option? And I think what you highlight really well is it's that power dynamic. We're really taught as young women to respect the power dynamic, to say, oh, well, they're the one with all the money or they have all the power, so yes, I should listen to them. It's not how it should be.
Right, and that's because we live in a patriarchy, right? So, and all a patriarchy means is that there's a hierarchy. One person has power over another. Okay, and so that's what feminism is. It's not like women taking over. It's just that I can be in my power, my partner can be in his power, and we can be equal. Because there doesn't need to be a power over, but in a trauma bond, there is a power imbalance, and somebody, the pathological lover, exploits that power.
Trauma bond is such a huge part of your book, Run Like Hell.
Mm-hmm.
And can you explain to the audience, the intricacies and what essentially is a trauma bond?
Yeah, so a trauma bond is a toxic, dysfunctional relationship between two emotionally attached people, right? So if I go to the supermarket, I'm not going to have a trauma bond with someone I'm not emotionally attached to, right? So it has to be between two emotionally attached people. The first thing that makes it so dysfunctional is exactly what we're saying. One of the people, the pathological lover, wants power and control over their lover, right? So their whole intention and all of their manipulations are to have power and control over their partner. It has to have two things. It has to have the power imbalance, like we talked about. One of the partners has the power, and it has to have a second piece, which is intermittent reinforcement, where 70% of the time the partner is cruel, controlling, abusive, mean, but that 30% of the time the partner's charming, generous, kind, and helpful. And so it's those two extreme behaviors that create extreme feelings inside of us, which actually create the bonds. It really creates like a biochemical addiction almost, honestly. And that 30% where the lover is kind is the hope, and hope is the hook in a trauma bond.
Well, if we kind of look at your trauma bond with Jordan and yourself, I've heard you explain that, you thought your upbringing was relatively normal.
Yes.
There wasn't like any like big car crash trauma in front
Correct.
of you. And then I'm not too sure about his past, but is there something that turns like a PL into this narcissistic Machiavellian, archetype? Was there something that you could see in his past? You're like, oh yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, listen, nobody has perfect parents, right? We all have some sort of needs that weren't met as children. That's just the reality. But you really only have to have good enough parents to develop into a functioning adult. So for him, I know that, first of all, we live in a patriarchy, right? So if you could take a certain personality and give it a lot of money, right, they're going to have a lot more power and they might abuse it. And his family, who I'm still very close with, his dad deceased, but his mom, who is alive, who I just adore, but his dad did rage at him. So his dad was a very lovely man, but he had his own developmental trauma, right, that then got passed on. And so his dad was a very, erratic man. Very erratic man with a lot of rage. And so a lot of times what can happen too is that when a child grows up with a very dominating parent, they can make a vow to never be dominated again and be the dominator.
It's protection, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah. And I'm not saying like that's exactly what happened with him, but I'm sure that was a piece of it.
So you think there's almost, everyone has their own, generational trauma or own things, and then it's the randomness of if you meet that person and you're like kind of almost a lethal cocktail for each other and you don't know from the beginning, but once you get into the trauma bond, it's like, what the hell have we done here?
Yeah, exactly. Nobody goes into this hoping that they're going to be betrayed and lied to and abused, right? That would be madness. But what happens is that by the time the mask falls and you get to see Dirty John, you're already in trance, you're already in love with this person. And if you're a person like me who scores high in conscientiousness and high in agreeableness, I was determined to make it work, right? we can figure this out. We can do this. Love conquers all. You know what? Love does not conquer all. That's another myth.
But I feel like we're taught that so much as little girls, like love is everything, you have to have it running through your bones, and like just trust the man. And it's just not what you would want to teach your daughter or any like young woman today. Something you said earlier, let me see your actions and then I'll believe your words after. I think that's the biggest. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And we don't have to tolerate things that we don't agree with, that are out of alignment with our values. A lot of things that I tolerated were really out of alignment with my values. But again, with this belief that love can conquer all, we can find our way, I just stayed till I didn't.
How far into the marriage did you begin to recognize the mask was slipping? Like, when did your alarm bells go beep, 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 beep?
Oh,
beep?
it happens right away.
Okay.
It happened for me very quick, like 3 months, and all the dominating started to happen. Like, I'm not going to marry you if you're not, no, I'm not, I'm not going to date you if you're not going to marry me. So the threats started to happen. And again, being so young and naive, I didn't want to get married, but I just was like, well, you know what? I love him. He just loves me so much. I'm just going to chalk it up to love, right? I didn't understand about coercive control. I didn't even know that was a thing.
People still don't know it's a thing today.
No, and it's very important. And coercive control is really a form of emotional and verbal abuse where you are dominated, threatened, isolated, intimidated, and you can't have autonomy. You can't have your own will. It's the pathological lover's way or the highway.
I mean, that's like a big thing we're trying to explain at the moment with the Andrew Tate case. That's in like a bit of a different capacity. It's not in a domestic arena. It's more in it's sex trafficking arena. And it's so surprising when you go and ask people, coercive control, do you know what that means? And people don't know what it means. So obviously, if you don't know what it means, you can't really understand the problem of, when we do look at various things like sex trafficking, you can't even begin to understand that until you can understand the definition of what is actually happening to those people.
Exactly. And it's just really, the Gabby Petito case, thank God, has, unfortunately for her, but in her legacy has shown a light on it. People like Andrew Tate, it's criminalized in Great Britain now. Coercive control.
And I think they've set a court date for 2027 for him and his brother.
2027?
I mean, justice takes a long time, doesn't it?
Yeah, it takes a long time. It takes a very long time. And here in the States, there are 8 states that recognize it in family court. So we're getting there little by little.
I mean, that's why it's important to have people like you, Nay. You're out there fighting the good fight and, not letting people slide on this. So in the book, when I was listening to it, he is very grandiose, as you've described, very, self-infantilizing. The one thing that would annoy me, and I'm going to guess it annoys the hell out of you, is, kind of this condensation of you being a trophy wife. Yeah. And if I was married to someone, I've bared their children, I've raised them, I've tried to see them through addiction, I've really gone to the finish line of what love is. And you said, you lead with love. I would be pissed as hell if someone called me a trophy wife and just reduced me to that.
I know. The funny thing is that I so know that that's not what I am. You know what I mean? So, and he makes fun of me throughout the whole book, right? And it's true. I am a learner. Like when I was married to him, I went to school, interior design school, I went to cooking school, I went to wine school. You know why? I wanted to know if it was a place or a grape. I wanted to know what I was eating. I wanted to know if it was Louis the 14th or Louis the 16th, right? I like to be educated. So he made fun of me, in the book with all that. And honestly,
and you're 22 trying to figure out what you want to do.
Yeah. And I wanted to be smart about it. I grew up poor. I didn't know if what all these things were, and I wanted to understand them. So luckily for me, I really just don't give a shit. Because I just know who I am, and I know the depth of my personality, and I've been in therapy since I'm 23, and and I think trophy wife is just another misogynistic term. that's full of ignorance, you know? You know?
I sometimes think it's so backwards the way people even think of marriage. You know, there's the whole thing of after man and woman divorce, and he tries to make sure she gets none of the money and stuff. I'm
Right.
stereotyping here, but it's common. And they say, she doesn't deserve the money. She wasn't out working. Oh, so she wasn't having your children. She wasn't looking after your children whilst you're at work and all these other things. And she didn't give up her career to be with you.
Right. Right. Well, that's the internalized misogyny in society, right? So I really just don't care, I guess, because, thank God, I think when the movie came out, I was 45. So I think I was just I just done so much work on myself, and that didn't mean I didn't have my moments where I would, get upset about it. But like I said, I was getting my doctorate. It was such a monumental time in my life, and I was working in a career that I love and living my purpose. That people can call you whatever they want, but nobody can take away your truth if you're really grounded in it.
But it's not completely you. So I guess you knowing that.
Yeah, and I knew it was his lens and his narrative, and here's the thing: the only person we can control in life is ourselves. And when the movie came out, I never said a word about it. I waited till about 3-4 years ago when I really got interested in the topic of trauma bonds, and I was writing my book. Because again, I wasn't just going to talk about it. If I'm going to talk about it, I'm going to do it with a purpose, and I'm going to do it to help people. And like I said, I really didn't know how people were going to respond. I did one little video, and it went viral, and I was like, okay, women want to know.
Of course they want to know. You've obviously gone on and had this really fruitful career now as a therapist, and I think that speaks a lot to your character, that you want to go out and you want to help people and help women who have gone through these circumstances. And it's not always visible, it is physical sometimes, but it's not something that we can always see because there's a haze. When he obviously left prison, he wrote this book, and then I'm sure he had an idea to flip it into a film because he's a business guy at the end of the day, a sales guy. He understands that. He says in the book that, this is a cautionary tale. This is not a prescription of life, but I can't help but feel that most people do watch the film and they do see it prescription for life. What do you think he was actually writing the book for? To spread the good message of don't lose yourself to greed, to addiction, and all of these things?
Yeah,
Or
I
I
really
don't know.
don't know. That would really be a question for him. But he
Mm.
does say it's a cautionary tale. And it is a cautionary tale because he lost his whole family. I mean, he still has a great relationship with his children, which is wonderful, and I always facilitated that and made sure that he had access to them because I could have stopped that, but I would never do that. Um, so I don't know, but it is a cautionary tale. But of course, the way it was made, it was glorified. Right, it was glorified, and it doesn't seem like people took it as a cautionary tale.
I mean, yeah, it's just that thing of even like yourself. You've wrote the book yourself. You write this thing, and it's for you, and then you release it into the public, and they just make of what they will of it. I'm sure when the film came out, you had press asking you what you
Oh
think
yeah,
in
all
this.
the time. Yeah, I just never answered.
That's so strong though. Like if I was that annoyed, and I'd be like screaming and be like, no, this is right and this is wrong and this and. But yeah, where do you find that strength of not retaliating?
Yeah, I just think that's part of my character. I don't think I'm a very vindictive, revengeful person. Yeah, I just think cream rises to the top, as my current husband told me. And again, as you get older and you've done enough work on yourself, you trust the process. I trust the process of life, even though it can be so hard and I'm biting my nails sometimes while I'm trying to do that. But I trust the process of life. And because I did that, look at all the great things that emerged. Right now, I get to use the most misogynistic movie on the planet and exploit it for women everywhere. Like, I couldn't have written that better if I tried. It's just like when I say it out loud, it's so crazy.
No, it is absolutely bonkers when you think about it.
It is.
Like I don't think there's probably many people on this globe who are in your exact same position.
No,
No.
I've had a colorful life.
One thing that I did pick up quite heavily in the book was, because I've never heard it before, is the dark tetrad.
Yes.
So as soon as you learn about something, you start kind of observing around your life and seeing, well, that person, they fit into this category and that category. And it's hard because we all do have a certain level of narcissism within us. You know, no one is born without at least 1% of it. I always say if someone says, oh, I'm just completely not a narcissist, that's not who I am, they're probably a narcissist.
Right.
But could you explain to the audience, you know, the dark am I saying it right? The dark tetrad.
Yeah, dark tetrad. Yeah. So what happened is when I went back to the research, and we had just lived through Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, the priests, right, the Boy Scouts molesting, like all of these horrible situations where power was really getting abused. Like these people were really abusing their power. So I wanted to know who the hell is doing this. And so that's when I discovered the dark tetrad, which is a psychological term that was discovered in 2002. And it's an umbrella term for a group of people who have malevolent intention. And so at the core of this person is antagonism, meaning they're hostile, they're deceitful, they are revengeful, they are quite conniving, but it has 4 different dark personalities at subclinical levels. And it has psychopathy, Machiavellianism, which means somebody's highly manipulative. It does have narcissism, and it does have sadism. And so usually a dark tetrad individual, they just have their own special mix of these different personality traits within those dark categories. Because they're not just narcissists. I wish they were just narcissists. Then they'd just be entitled and exploitative and into their ego and image. But with sadism, they want to harm people that they know because they get pleasure out of that, right? Machiavellianism, they're highly manipulative, highly strategic. Psychopathy, they have short-term exploitative mating strategies. So they all have their own dark flavor of really abusing, using, harming, betraying, and exploiting other people.
Someone who is of that concoction, that caliber of inhabiting these different mixtures,
Yeah.
is it more likely that concoction has been made by society through their conditioning, or is it something that is just innate and born into them?
Yeah, Dr. Salerno and he's a good friend of mine. He wrote this real beautiful book called The Nature or Nurture of Narcissism. And so what his research has recently shown is that, and we see this in the movie Adolescence, a lot of people,
Yep.
Yeah, it was great. A lot of people are born with these innate traits, this innate sort of brain that's predisposed to that way of being, right? So then so there's always multiple causality. There's, a genetic part, there's a psychological part, there's a social part, right? So it's psychosocial. So it's never just like one thing. There's multiple causality to create this personality. So we used to just think it was more environment, but his research has really illuminated that, and I think the show Adolescence does a great job, that psychopaths are also born.
And it's like whether they run into that thing that is just going to send them over the edge.
Turns it on for them. That's right.
I mean, adolescence is an interesting thing to touch on. We did a video on it on the channel. Obviously, it's set in like a British school, and I've gone to British school myself, and I kind of recognize some of these tropes of the classroom and stuff. When you were watching it, were you like, what the hell, or what is going on here, or were you not surprised by it?
I really wasn't that surprised, unfortunately, because what happens inside of this little boy, and the way they portrayed it in the show, is that this little boy is feeling rejected. He's feeling a lot of negative emotions inside. And instead of going and talking to his parents about it, and going and talking to somebody about it, because we all feel rejected in adolescence. I mean, I remember the girls wrote in the bathroom about me, Nadine looks like a Barbie. She has no nipples and pubic hair.
Girls sometimes can be the meanest.
Right. So, but I didn't go stab them to death.
No.
Right. So, but this is what happens, right? This manosphere And these people like Andrew Tate, who are like, you know what, when women reject you, you have to harm them. Instead of like tolerating his own rejection inside of him, which is painful, and especially at that age where it's more painful to deal with, he goes and he stabs her. And so I wasn't that surprised, but what I was kind of angry about is that we never get to know Katie.
No, I
You know,
agree.
that it's almost like, oh, she rejected him. She wrote something bad on his Facebook. Oh, she deserves to get killed. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. And the scene with the therapist really shows how psychopathic he is and how he has no respect for authority and how he attacks her.
I think one element in the show that really stood out to me was, I think it is with the therapist. The girl has sent like a
Yes.
naked picture around school or a topless photo, and she's been kind of ostracized because of it. And boys are kind of being like, oh, well, why don't you send one to me, kind of thing. And then Jamie recognizes, okay, she's going to be feeling sad. She's going to be feeling down. This is a
Yes.
terrible thing. And then he wants to ask her out or go on a date. I can't quite remember. But when the therapist probes him a little bit more, he said, well, I thought because, you know, it might have been a little bit easier because she was feeling
That's
ostracized and
right.
she was feeling neglected, which is so relational to this dark tetrad. No?
Yeah, it's predatory, right? Because the dark tetrad preys on people when they're extraordinarily vulnerable. And so he says it right there. I figured she was vulnerable and weak, so I'd ask her out. But then she's like, I'm not that desperate. That's what
Yeah.
Katie says, right? And so instead of tolerating the rejection, he goes after her. And he is a prime example. I mean, he's a psychopath. And he indicates it in that scene with the therapist in so many different ways.
I mean, between the two genders, because I guess it exhibits in both genders, is there a different way men and women show their narcissism, their dark
Yes.
tetrad?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, a dog tetrad individual, and this is what I say, they will use, harm, exploit, and betray anybody and everyone to get their needs met for money, power, pleasure, and status. So the masculine form of that usually is more dominating, intimidating, and more overt, where I think the female version of it can be more covert, not as much in your face. But basically, a selfish person that's going to use you to meet their needs is a selfish person.
We said agreeableness and kind of what you need to look out for if you are an agreeable person, because it's
Yeah.
easier to get in that cavity and exploit that. What if you're someone who is disagreeable? Is that something you need to almost be self-aware of and say, I might have tendencies to be maybe not that great sometimes, you know? I guess there's some upsides and some negative sides.
Yeah, just like everything, it's a paradox. You know, disagreeableness often can be caused due to developmental trauma. I mean, listen, again, it can be just innate temperament, but a lot of times, if your parents haven't protected and trusted you, if your parents haven't protected you and loved you and nurtured you and given you the space to feel safe, you might not trust people in
Yeah.
general, right? I mean, it kind of makes sense.
I mean, you say also, your worth is your birthright, which I loved in the book. I think that is just something that if we all had that programmed into us from being
Yes.
younger, it would sort out so many problems. Why do you think, like, in the world at the moment, as a therapist, a psychologist, why do you think we have such a disregard for worth even after, some of the atrocities in the world and the things we know are bad? Do we choose not to see that a lot of people have worth? You think we learn?
I think that people don't really take the time to work on their personal, psychological, and relational development. We teach everybody in school about writing, arithmetic, and reading, but what about the fourth R, relationships? Your relationship with yourself, your relationship with others, that's the foundation of our lives. And we expect that parents are going to know how to do this, and they don't because they're uneducated. And so that's really why people come to therapy, is to learn how to love themselves, is to learn how to love others. So really, I look at myself as a teacher. And I think the reason I'm good at it is because I've been in therapy for 25 years and I had to get a PhD, right, to learn how to do it. And so I just don't think in the world and society as a whole, we don't give enough value to that sort of education, which I think if we did, the world would be a lot kinder, more benevolent, safer place to live.
I think girls sometimes are a lot, well, no. I think girls maybe have an easier time of being able to learn about emotional intelligence and exercise it. But I do think men have a tough
They do.
time of,
They do.
yeah, being seen
And we
to.
and we and we haven't been fair to men, right? I mean, they have their own stereotypes and tropes too,
Mm,
right? That we put on to them as well that need to be broken down,
mm.
for sure, for sure. But I really see that changing. I know, my son's in therapy. I see with all my son-in-laws, they're all beautiful, emotional men. None of them are abusers, So I do see it changing as well. I do see it evolving. But yeah, we have to give men the space to say it's okay to be emotional.
I mean, that must be a really heartwarming feeling because this is your life's work, making sure that people have more emotional intelligence.
Yeah, my daughter, I'm living in Connecticut now, and I moved here to be closer to her. She's a therapist, and she has a 2-year-old, and she's pregnant, and she's married. And to see her in a loving relationship with a partner who treats her as an equal, and their home is chaos free, not perfect, but she has a very safe home with a loving husband, that's worth $1 billion because we broke the cycle.
It's cathartic, is the word.
Yeah, it's beautiful to see. And it's possible.
I think also when you have parents who have gone through yourself and Jordan an interesting time and they've probably observed things, you have two options of how you're going to perceive that. And obviously it sounds like it's worked out beautifully on your end of, the lessons
and
have been learned.
they both, my children have both been in therapy since they're 16, so they're always working on themselves as well. So we're either going to therapy, giving therapy. We're a real therapy family. But yeah, I just, a soul and a self does not just develop. We have to put time and energy and attention into it for us to reach our potential in life and love.
The one thing that I sometimes struggle with therapy, I myself have done some of it, but is the rumination of, sometimes maybe you can overthink on things too much.
Yes.
Where do you stand on being able to cut off and not ruminate and have a healthy amount of therapy?
Well, there's a difference between rumination and reflection. So that's an excellent question. So rumination is when we overthink, but we don't get anywhere. And we're just worrying. We're either ruminating about the past and we're depressed, or we're worrying about the future and we're anxious. But self-reflection is different. Self-reflection is where we're really able to observe ourselves, observe our patterns, and observe when things work right for us and when things work wrong for us. And to make it a conscious choice and to not react. Something happens, there's a moment when we pause. Right? So that there's a space between the stimulus and the response. And therapy really teaches you about yourself and teaches you how to be much more reflective, how to observe yourself, and how to make conscious choices. So the point of therapy is to reflect and then take action, right? Because we can't live up here thinking all the time. Then that we're not living in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really thought about that. When you go to therapy, you have an idea of what you might want to discuss, but you need to almost know what you want to get out of it.
And that's the therapist's job, to guide you.
And sometimes your therapist doesn't work for you, so you need to switch on to a different therapist.
For sure.
One thing that I want to touch on is more actionable advice on identifying a pathological lover, because I think, as you said, a pathological lover is someone who, is not doing it out of a place of I love you and I want to care for you. They're doing it out of a place of control, narcissism, that kind of thing. What are some things we can do to protect ourselves from them and kind of stop them in their tracks?
I mean, the first thing you can do is trust your gut. If you're on a date with somebody and your gut says, uh-oh, run, this isn't good, don't ignore that. We're so quick, especially as women, to dismiss our body. But the body really knows. And so really, if your body says that, follow it. If you go out with somebody and they say something that kind of sounds a little suspicious, be curious, press them on it. Again, don't skip over things. Or like I mentioned before, if you, I was just on the phone with a patient, and she said that had just met this guy, and he wanted to talk every single night, and she's like, I don't want to talk every single night, right? Because it was right away too much. So if when you just meet somebody, they shouldn't have a right to monopolize all your time and energy and space, right? Love is something that slowly over time builds. So if it's feeling too intense, too fast and furious, if you're noticing that it's feeling very dramatic and erratic right from the get-go, stay mindful of that. Don't dismiss those things.
Trust your gut. That's a really good piece of advice, because we often don't think, what is our gut? It doesn't really have any say over our brain, but does it?
It does. That's not true. Actually, we have the vagus nerve, which comes out of our back of our skull, and it wraps and it comes around the front and it goes into our viscera. And it's actually the nerve that's telling us whether the world or people is safe or dangerous. And so it sends messages into your viscera, which go back to your brain. So it's really working to protect you.
If you could dial it back to when you were 22, knowing what you know now, I guess you would have, do you think you would have, carried on with Jordan?
Whew, well, here's the thing. I have two beautiful children, so if I had to do it all over again, I would, because of them. But I would never want anybody to go through that much pain in the name of love.
Okay, interesting. So in terms of the customers, that was the wrong word. In terms of the women you see coming through your practice and you're speaking to them, connecting with them over their experiences, I guess some of the stuff is more kind of what you would say as subtle, it's hard to notice, and the stuff which is just completely batshit crazy, it's out there and it's like, this is so wrong. Would you say it's harder to notice that subtle stuff and realize it's snowballing rather than, the big clear things that are happening to you?
Yeah, I think the subtle stuff is trickier because, remember, if somebody wants to hide their selfish intentions from you, they can do that for a long time, especially since love is blind. And love, those feelings of passion and oxytocin and dopamine make us overlook all the red flags, right? They make us dismiss it. So that's why I wrote my book, because I really wanted to give women a playbook. Like, I think you notice I literally mention every single type of scenario that can be used to trick you. The mind games, the twinning, the mind mapping, right? Just the coercive control. So if the only defense we have is education, is to get educated about these things. Thank God today there's so much information. When I was a young girl, nobody was talking about this. So get educated. That's what social media is also so great for. But also on my website, I have so many free resources for people. And actually, I'm going to send you the first chapter of my book for all your listeners for free. So make sure we get that to you.
Thank you. I listened to the whole audiobook of your book, and I have to say, because it was so, there's so much in it. And when you said a nugget that resonated with me, I had to almost stop, go away, think about it, really digest it, and then go back and listen to it again.
There's a lot of information in there. There's a lot. But
it's the complete volume of what you need to focus on. Was that the hardest thing you professionally have had to do in terms of writing, harder than the PhD?
Of course, I'm the only idiot that finished my book right before AI. Okay, so AI would have made it a lot easier. But yes, it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's worth it because it's helping women everywhere.
Yeah, no, I actually put someone onto it the other day because of my research. I was just blown away by it. And she's going through a difficult situation at the moment. Dr. Nay, where can people find you?
Yeah, so go. So I'm on my Instagram, The Real Dr. Nadine. Go to my website, drnae.com. Read my book, Run Like Hell. And I just started an online community for women called Sir Thriver. So I've taken my book and I put it into an online course. And then I popped it into a community where we post every day. I run 3 to 4 support groups a week, and we have a weekly live expert come in and educate everybody. And it's literally $30 a month. It's $1 a day.
And so Thriver, I guess that's like a play on, just making it more of a positive thing.
Yeah, surviving and thriving, right? Because when you're in a trauma bond, you're just surviving. And so Thriver, because the research shows that, especially after relational trauma, like a trauma bond, 75% of the people can go on to experience post-traumatic growth. So, which is a great statistic, and it's real. And so I wanted a safe place off of social media where women can come and get educated and feel empowered. I started it February 24th, and the women are loving it. It's so exciting. Like today I'm running a support group at 4 p.m.
Finally, it's very hard, this question, but if there's one thing you could say to someone going through a trauma bond and they're in that haze, that mist, and they don't know which way is up, which way is down, it's kind of like being in an avalanche,
Yeah, it is.
What's the one thing that you could say with all of your professional experience that would just help them realize, it can get better, you can get out of this?
Yeah, so if you're listening to this and you're like, oh God, that sounds like it could be me, look for the helpers. There are helpers everywhere in the world. Don't isolate, because trauma bonds make us isolate because we feel so much shame. Reach out to a friend, reach out to a family member, find a trauma-informed coach, go to my Instagram, start to get educated, because there is a way out. I'm living proof, and I've helped hundreds of women pull them across the finish line. So don't think you have to stay trapped forever.
There you go. There you have it. Put Dr. Nay's social links all in the bio below. And thank you so much for joining us. It's been...
Oh, thank you so much, Heidi. This was an excellent interview. You're so good at your job.
You know what, though? I get a little bit scared that I bumble sometimes because I'm thinking of all the questions and I'm like...
No, you did great. You did great.
If you found this episode interesting or enjoyed it, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button down here. It helps me out more than you know. I'm an independent production. Or check out one of our past episodes here. There's one here. There's one here. That's what I'm imagining.